Let's have a little chat about conflicts of interest, shall we? Kia ora, my name's Kimmy, and I talk about Formula One in the world's second worst accent. And can somebody please explain to me, in a way that makes sense, how despite the never ending controversies and dubious calls and contentious interpretation of the rulebook, we still do not have professional stewards in this damn sport? Go ahead! I'll wait for all the flaming hot takes in the comments. Before I get into the stewarding situation, let's talk for a minute about the news that's dropped in the last few hours, as of writing this anyway, and that's Niels Wittich being let go as race director. The way the FIA tells it, he resigned. The way those who claim to be in the know tell it, he was unceremoniously fired. To say that's not a bit sus with 3 races to go in the season would be a bit disingenuous. To say it's not a bit sus after what went on in Brazil is even more so. I guess it's time for the obligatory disclaimer. This video is for entertainment purposes and is not intended to be inferred as serious journalism. All opinions imparted in this video are based off observations gleaned from research that I cannot guarantee comes from verified sources, and observations based off events that have happened where the exact decision-making process is not clear and leaves room for interpretation. Any potential conclusions discussed in this video are not accusations of guilt or corruption, and merely speculation based on viewing events from an outside perspective and forming an opinion based on my own internal logic. Right, now that we've got that out of the way, now Vittich's departure to me reminds me a lot of when Eduardo Freitas was fired back in 2022 when the pair shared the role on alternate Grand Prix weekends. It also has a bit of that Massey stink around it too. Freitas was let go after the telehandler on circuit incident in Japan, where Pierre Gasly narrowly missed a recovery vehicle in pretty abysmal conditions. The fact this incident happened in almost exactly the same spot as an eerily similar and horrific accident that ultimately cost Jules Bianchi his life made the optics of the whole thing even more egregious. Freitas was fired and Wittich took on the role full time. Fast forward to Brazil 2024, where there were 3 sort of interesting calls that could be interpreted as having a specific goal in mind depending on your angle. First, we had the Hülkenberg of it all. In the sprint, Nico Hülkenberg's car decided to go on strike on lap 20. He was parked up on the side of the track, very clearly in a vulnerable position. Now, yes, the conditions were good on this occasion. However, the location of the breakdown combined with the fact that Nico replaced the steering wheel after removing it in a clear attempt to get it closer to the barriers and thus easier for recovery, caused a bit of confusion with McLaren, who went back on their call to Oscar to swap positions. Now, this was always going to be a VSC. The position of Hülkenberg's car, combined with the fact that it had a long way to go across grass to get it to a proper recovery position, there's no way race control can justify putting driver and marshals at risk all for the sake of a couple of laps at racing speed. The VSC, however, wasn't called until 2 laps later, which gave McLaren time to swap their cars in the interim. A decision that should have been taken at the start of the race, as soon as Norris broke free of Leclerc, who at the time had been sitting in 3rd. Now, as I was watching this whole thing unfold, it just didn't really sit right with me. There's absolutely no benefit to anyone other than McLaren not to immediately call that VSC. It's not like a full safety car, it doesn't bunch up the pack, and it can be cancelled at any time during the lap. The only reason I can see to delay the deployment of it is to give McLaren time to switch the cars. Even if that's not what was going through race control's minds, it doesn't matter. It's the optics of the whole thing. Putting a driver and a group of marshals at risk, resulting in a points benefit to the driver currently sitting second in the championship. That's a fact. It's what happened. The intent may have been different, however, this was the outcome. Fast forward again to Grand Prix qualifying. Max Verstappen has a nailed-on 5-place grid penalty and is going to be trying to make up places in the race regardless of his qualifying position. This time, the conditions are pretty damn abysmal. With 1:37 left in Q2, the yellow flag comes out. Lance Stroll's in the wall. It's not a particularly gentle hit, and even though Stroll does try to get the car moving again with a kind of comical back and forth of the gears if you watch the onboard, it's pretty clear that car's not going anywhere. Plus, there's debris. It takes race control another 51 seconds to bring out the red flag. Now, in their defense, we have a couple of things going on here. 1. Lance is clearly still trying to get the car going so that he can get back to the pits and potentially go out for Q3. We know now that that was never going to happen, but hindsight's 2020. 2. Sure, in theory, a minute 37 is enough time for one or two cars to push hard and get around the circuit for a timed lap if the session was resumed, but only one or two cars. The session wouldn't have restarted regardless. I don't think the issue here is so much with could drivers have got another timed lap in if it had restarted. It's more how many cars crossed the start finish line and improved their times while there was a car parked up on the side of the road in not so great conditions. Now, granted, Max was knocked into P11 when Charles managed to get a lap in a couple of seconds after the yellow flag was flown. However, there was still a whole lot of shuffling of the leaderboard in the meantime, which seemed to largely be about letting those who hadn't been affected by the yellow flag finish their lap. Max, who was one of the drivers behind Stroll when he crashed and thus one of those affected cars, was also dropped down one further position when Bottas popped in a time to get him into that 11th place. Yes, cars were going past Stroll's stationary Aston at a reduced speed, but cars can aquaplane at any speed and they're still going pretty damn quick in the grand scheme of things. I think no matter what call race control made here, it would have been controversial, and perhaps this is more a reason to bring up the conversation around red flags in qualifying and whether or not there should be force majeure provisions in the regulations to allow small extensions of qualifying sessions in the instance of a late stage red flag. I kind of like the jeopardy. However, I can see the benefits for this in the interest of fairness, and considering safety is such a key issue in the sport, I think it's something that needs at least a little bit of consideration. Having a potential 1 or 2 minute extension would mean less incentive for race control to delay bringing out a red flag. Finally, we have the Grand Prix itself and the whole situation with the safety car and the conditions. Drivers were calling for red flags from the cockpit. Ollie Behrman was driving almost completely blind because he didn't know the track well enough to gauge where the corners were in the spray. People were coming in for full wets, even though the forecast supposedly was for it to ease. And when watching it live, it sure did look like classic red flag levels of rain. Yes, if you call a halt, there's a chance things are going to get worse and it won't get going again. But is it best to leave cars out in conditions where they're struggling to keep things on the road even under safety car, or be a little bit more cautious and stop it quickly before teams start making the call to change tyres because they're worried that they're going to end up with big repair bills? Surely everyone will make the call to come into the pits, right? Wrong! You've got 3 dudes who grew up driving lap after lap in miserable conditions at the front of the field. They aren't coming in until their back ends are acting like RX-7s on a skid pan. And the more I think about it, the more it feels to me like race control was banking on the rain easing and the front runners who opted not to come into the pits getting eaten up pretty quickly by those who'd gone for the fresh rubber. Either that or get it to 75% race distance under safety car so full points are awarded, which would have been far enough that those 3 would have probably had to come in at some point and dropped all the way to the back. But it's too late. Pull a red flag now and Verstappen, Ocon and Gasly get a free tyre change. It's all over. Best to keep these things going and good luck to them on the restart. They'd crossed the point of no return when the leaders started coming in, and now the only way Norris is going to win the race and keep that championship battle alive is if one of those 2 scenarios plays out. Ultimately though, Franco Colapinto's crash forced their hand, and we ended up with a situation that could have been in McLaren's favour, having the complete opposite effect. And, well, a drive for a win that will go down in history as one of the greats. So that's 3 controversial moments in one weekend. All decisions that were managed by race control, all decisions that were ultimately on Niels Wittich, and all decisions that didn't play well in the media from a variety of standpoints. For Wittich, I think the writing was on the wall. Am I surprised it happened in between Brazil and Vegas? Yes. Am I surprised it happened at all? Absolutely not. And then we have the matter of stewards. We have one of the most lucrative sports in the world, owned by the most valuable sports empire in the world. Forbes' words, not mine. This isn't me just spitting out random words. And for some reason, we still have, near as makes no difference, referees acting in a voluntary capacity. And in fairness, this is probably in part because the stewards are appointed by the FIA, not Formula One management. However, as they're a key part of the operation of a race weekend, the onus should be on Liberty Media to pay a decent salary to permanent stewards, rather than relying on people who want to keep themselves relevant and continue to hold influence over the paddock. Now, before we continue, I'm just going to say, please, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you subscribe to my channel. It's extremely helpful. Give this video a like. Heck, give it a dislike if you want to. Get in the comments, debate. I don't care what you say. Any click helps. Although if you are particularly gross, I might delete it, but it's a high threshold. You have to say something pretty nasty for me to really go down that road. Chances are, if you don't see your comment, YouTube flagged it as vile and disgusting before I even saw it, so I don't care. Anyway, subscribe to my channel. Those of you who watch every week, you are awesome. I love you. Now on with the video. Because this is what the end result will always be. Yes, you'll have stewards who are doing the work because they believe in the purpose, but then you'll also always have others who get involved because it's something that gives them that wonderfully addictive thing. Power. And then you have the matter of personal biases, which is something everyone has. You might say you don't have them, but everyone does. And if you think you don't, then I'm sorry to say you are kidding yourself. But when you combine personal biases with the ability to influence the outcome and potentially regulations of a sport, you have a big-ass problem. Because then there's also the issue of outside influence. And what I mean by that is the potential for stewards to inform their decisions based on existing partnerships they have with organisations that in any other sport would be pretty clear conflicts of interest. Now, I want to make it very clear that I am not making any accusations against anyone directly here. Refer back to that disclaimer. But when you're relying on someone working for nothing, usually what ends up happening is that person needs to seek out an alternative form of income. Yeah, sure, some of these guys are former F1 drivers themselves, but that money doesn't last forever, and not all of them were earning the mega bucks. Most stewards have no personal experience in an F1 car and are involved in various forms of motorsport, either officiating or in administrative roles, and they have day jobs. Let's use everyone's favourite steward here, a big part of the ongoing conversation of the last few weeks. Johnny Herbert, ex-F1 driver, former Sky F1 pundit, after-dinner speaker, and current favourite insider of choice for interviews by sports betting websites. Could you imagine a referee from any other sport offering up their thoughts and opinions to anything associated with sports betting? Could you? That is so unbelievably unethical. I can't believe there hasn't been some sort of intervention yet. It also demonstrates a serious problem with Herbert's ability to judge what is and what isn't appropriate, and a certain level of arrogance that kind of speaks for itself. Because regardless of whether or not Herbert is getting any sort of remuneration for his punditry here, the idea that a referee of a sport is offering up insight into said sport to organisations that are directly linked to the facilitation of gambling on said sport is a pretty damn terrible look. It's also pretty telling that often, from what I can tell and based off links going to nowhere, these interviews get taken down once they're picked up by various F1 news websites. What are you trying to hide? If it's not dubious in its ethics, why does the article no longer exist? But what about other stewards? There's 4 people at the desk each race, after all. Stewards are required to hold a specific license, so it's not like the FIA is out there just assigning umpire duties on randos who happen to have ties to the motorsport community. However, because these positions are pretty much voluntary, as I mentioned earlier, there is an opportunity for conflict of interest. And to be fair, there are provisions for this in the International Sporting Code, but the wording is vague at best. One short paragraph that appears deliberately left open to interpretation to allow for the regulating body to decide what is and what isn't egregious enough to be considered unethical. Let's give it a read, shall we? Where are we? Article 11.5, Conflict of Interest. In accordance with Article 2.2 of the FIA Code of Ethics, no official, in particular stewards, race directors, clerks of the course, scrutineers, secretaries of the event, chief timekeepers, and where appropriate the technical delegates shall have or appear to have financial or personal interests that may detract from his ability to perform his duties with integrity and in an independent and diligent manner. No mention of an appendix here, so I can only assume this is the extent of the policy. I also find it very interesting the use of male pronouns. Might want to reword that into something a bit more gender neutral there, FIA. I hear they and their and them are really great catch-all terms. So what about stewards with family members who are employed by teams or sponsors of teams? Stewards who take money from organisations affiliated with teams for speaking engagements. Stewards who've demonstrated in the past that they have particular bias for or against certain drivers or certain teams or even certain personnel, team principals, technical directors, the list goes on. I don't know, man. We already complain about how corrupt F1 can be, how everyone's got their fingers in so many pies, how sponsors of teams or drivers also have ties to FOM themselves or to tracks or shady tobacco industry think tanks. Remember Mission Winnow? Who knows how many of these more obscure stewards either directly or indirectly own shares in sponsors or even teams? Who knows how many of them have big crypto investments, like for exchanges plastered all over a car? How are they required to disclose these things, and where is the threshold? The constant rotation of minimally compensated stewards who live in relative obscurity makes it almost impossible to learn more than surface level about the people who are making decisions that can affect the outcome of world championships and influence regulations that make this whole thing actually work. So get with it, FIA. Sure, it's a big calendar, and sure, it's a thankless task, but it's those people, and more importantly, paying those people well who really want to be there because they love the sport and believe the job of stewardship and how important it is for the integrity of Formula One that you need in those roles. As soon as someone is a proper employee, there's stakes, there's a contract, there's obligations they need to meet in a professional context that can't be waved away with, they're basically volunteers, we can't have that expectation on them. Because I don't know about you, but I think a basic expectation that should be put on any kind of referee is please don't talk to sports betting websites. What the actual F is wrong with you?